What's the red heifer all about? Numbers 19, verse 1. Yahweh spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, This is the statute of the law which Yahweh has commanded. Tell the children of Israel to bring you a red heifer without spot, in which is no defect, and which was never yoked. You shall give her to Eleazar the priest, and he shall bring her outside of the camp, and one shall kill her before his face. Eleazar the priest shall take some of her blood with his finger, and sprinkle her blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. One shall burn the heifer in his sight. Her skin and her meat and her blood with her dung shall he burn. Comment: the red heifer has no spot or defect, so right away we know it represents Christ, who had no sin. Verse 2, the heifer never wore a yoke. Galatians 5:1, a yoke is associated with slavery and sin. Christ was never a slave of sin. He was always the free son of his Father. Red's not the usual color. It's rare. Speaking of Jesus Christ, Yahweh says, Isaiah 13:12, quote, I will make a man more rare than fine gold, end quote. And Christ is rare in the sense that he's, quote, the one and only Son of the Father, John 1:14. And red is not only rare, it's beautiful. Zechariah 9:17 says of Yahweh, quote, how great is his beauty, end quote. And of Christ it says, quote, he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, Hebrews 1:3. So Christ has the Father's beauty. So the rare and beautiful, spotless red heifer that was slain should make us definitely think of Christ. The heifer was slain outside the camp, Hebrews 13:12, quote, therefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate, end quote. Verse 3, the heifer was to be killed while Eleazar looked on, Matthew 27:41, the chief priests, scribes, and elders looked on while Jesus was crucified. Zechariah 12:10 says of him, quote, they will look on me whom they have pierced, end quote. So Eleazar will take the blood on his finger as the priests had blood on their hands when they crucified Christ. He sprinkled it 7 times in the direction of the tent of meeting. The tent of meeting was the place that God met with man. So Christ's blood is validating the idea that we can meet with God. They burned the entire heifer to signify the disappearance and resurrection of Christ. Verse 6, the priest shall take cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet, and cast it into the middle of the burning of the heifer. Comment, these items represent attributes of Christ. Hyssop is for cleansing, quote, purify me with hyssop and I shall be clean. Wash me and I shall be whiter than snow, Psalm 51:7. Cedar could remind us of Christ's incorruptibility, and scarlet could remind us of his blood. Verse 7, then the priest shall wash his clothes, and he shall bathe his flesh in water, and afterward he shall come into the camp, and the priest shall be unclean until the evening. Comment, after presiding over the mock crucifixion, the priest is unclean. Verse 8, he who burns her shall wash his clothes in water, and bathe his flesh in water, and shall be unclean until the evening. A man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer, and lay them up outside of the camp in a clean place, and it shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for use in the water for cleansing impurity. It is a sin offering. He who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. It shall be to the children of Israel and to the stranger who lives as a foreigner among them for a statute forever. Comment, anybody associated with the killing was unclean. Verse 9, the heifer was a sin offering, as was Christ. The ashes shall be, quote, for use in water for cleansing impurity, end quote. Now coming up in the rest of the chapter, how the water of cleansing should be used for anyone who's come near a dead body. Verse 11, he who touches the dead body of any man shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with water on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day he shall be clean. But if he doesn't purify himself the 3rd day, then the 7th day he shall not be clean. Whoever touches a dead person, the body of a man who has died, and doesn't purify himself, defiles Yahweh's tabernacle, and that soul shall be cut off from Israel, because the water for impurity was not sprinkled on him. He shall be unclean. His uncleanness is yet on him. Comment, Yahweh dwells among Israel in the tabernacle, particularly on the mercy seat of the ark. That's a picture of his eternal throne. It's also a picture of eternity where we're going to dwell with him. There's not going to be any death there, not so much as a residue or trace of it. Death is our enemy, and therefore it's God's enemy. It came in the picture when Adam and Eve ate the fruit. So at the proper time, God is going to abolish death. Quote, the last enemy that will be abolished is death, 1 Corinthians 15:26. The water of cleansing, which is fortified with the ashes of the heifer, will in the fullness of time, which is 7 days, render the person clean who's touched death. Christ will cleanse and rid us of every residue of death. It's our enemy and his, and it does not belong in his house whatsoever. Now going on about different scenarios regarding the uncleanness of human death, verse 14. This is the law when a man dies in a tent. Everyone who comes into the tent and everyone who is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. Every open vessel which has no covering bound on it is unclean. Whoever in the open field touches one who is slain with a sword, or a dead body, or a bone of a man, or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. For the unclean they shall take of the ashes of the burning of the sin offering, and running water shall be poured into a vessel. A clean person shall take hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle it on the tent, on all the vessels, on the persons who were there, and on him who touched the bone, or the slain, or the dead, or the grave. The clean person shall sprinkle on the unclean on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. On the 7th day he shall purify him. He shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and shall be clean at evening. Comment, that's the procedure. Now about the person who might neglect to purify himself, verse 20. But the man who shall be unclean and shall not purify himself, that soul shall be cut off from among the assembly, because he has defiled the sanctuary of Yahweh. The water for impurity has not been sprinkled on him. He is unclean. It shall be a perpetual statute to them. He who sprinkles the water for impurity shall wash his clothes, and he who touches the water for impurity shall be unclean until evening. Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the soul that touches it shall be unclean until evening. Comment, as we read in Leviticus, no one who was ceremonially unclean for any reason could approach the tabernacle, and there were many common occurrences that could render a person unclean. So everyone had to attend to his cleansings or be cut off from among his people, meaning that person couldn't participate in tabernacle life or the atoning sacrifices or be with his people in the presence of Yahweh. We must be pure. Jesus said, John 13:8, quote, if I don't wash you, you have no part with me, end quote. So we must keep praying for cleansing. Ezekiel 36:25, quote, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your filthiness, end quote. Let's do what the leper did in Luke 5, verses 12 and 13, quote, there was a man full of leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, saying, Lord, if you want to, you can make me clean. He stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I want to be made clean. Immediately the leprosy left him, end quote. That's the chapter. You can find the link for Numbers 20 easily at landofhavilah.net, Numbers chapter 20.